Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Chloe McCulloch, the Editorial Director of Building Design and Housing Today. And this webinar is all about materials challenges. And we've got a whole day event online on our website about materials challenges, but we're kicking off today with this webinar, which is specifically looking at what the construction industry can do to combat the material shortages that we're experiencing at the moment. So obviously it's hit the headlines a lot recently. There's a lot to discuss, and with us to discuss a lot of points, we've got Peter Capelhorn, Chief Executive of the Construction Products Association. He also co-chairs the Construction Leadership Council's Brexit movement of building products and materials group. Have I got that right, Peter? Yeah. Oh, mic's off, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, first technical hitch. We just call it PAG.
Right, for sure. That's
yeah.
So we will broaden into that, where you've got that hat as well as your CPA hat. So we'll come to that in a minute. Then we've got Dean Avery's Director of Bid Construction, so he can give us some sort of first-hand experience of you know, how contractors are dealing with the material shortages and sort of practical steps. And then we've got Rachel Houlihan from the Architect Orms, so to give us that sort of architecture perspective as well. So a really great panel. We should have some really interesting views. Just before we get into that, just a couple of housekeeping things. A reminder that you are really welcome. We would really encourage you to post your questions. We won't get to them straight away. As soon as you post them, we will store them up and do a Q&A session at the end. So the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes will be dedicated to your questions. So please do post those throughout, and it gives me a chance to sort them through by theme. And also for people who can only attend a part of this while it's live, it is available on demand once it's finished. So we often get a lot of questions of, can I see, you know, see the presentations or hear the speakers again? Yes, you can. Just come back via the link that you've got, and it will be available on demand. So hopefully that's dealt with some initial housekeeping things. We're keeping this to an hour, so I'll try and wrap that up at 10:30. And I think that's probably everything. So it's probably enough for me. I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to give you the perspective from the CPA and the CLC. And the rest of us are going to turn off our webcams and hand over to Peter.
Fabulous. Chloe, thank you very much. It's great to be part of this, and thank you for inviting me along this morning. And yes, it is trying to give you a perspective from the CPA and CLC perspective. We started the CLC group because we were concerned about Brexit issues, actually, way back in the middle of last year. But since then, clearly other things have come into play. And what I think we are in the middle of, it's perfectly fair to describe it as a perfect storm. We have a number of situations which are affecting severely products across the UK. And what I wanted to do is just give this a bit of context before we start to drill into the detail. So if we look at the world stage, we obviously have different effects of the pandemic affecting different countries now. But in particular, we see that the Chinese economy and the American economy are starting to really rev up big time. And they are tending to suck in large amounts of global commodities, which are having an effect on the world stage. So, for instance, we have that effect regarding steel, regarding aluminium, and of course we also have it with regard to timber. Timber is slightly characterized as well, because prior to the pandemic, we were also having shortages in the timber world, mainly caused by production problems. We had a warmer winter in Scandinavia, which resulted in poor access to the timber. And all of that has then rolled out through the last year or so to get us to a situation of some significant constraints. And of course, all of these key commodities are not just one topic. You know, people talk about there's a shortage of steel, shortage of aluminium, but of course there are lots of grades of those materials, and it affects the particular parts of the system in different ways. And so when we are looking at that from a construction point of view, it may well be a particular grade of steel or a particular type of timber that we're after that is disproportionately affected. Now, there have also been other global issues going on as well. There has been the whole placing of containers across the world has caused significant problems. So at the end of last year, for instance, we ended up with a huge amount of empty containers in Europe and America. And trying to correct that balance has taken some time. And in the interim, it put the cost of containers up significantly. We also all saw that ship blocking the Suez Canal. And believe it or not, that's had a significant effect across the world in terms of, again, trying to rebalance the containers, but also just trying to make sure that those supply chains are open and free working. We also see through both the container issues and also through the pandemic, countries like Italy and India, who have been affected slightly at a different rate, obviously, to the UK, the kind of products that have been affected by that, such as ironmongery from Italy and India, and white goods from Italy as well. So there are a whole collection of different problems on the world stage that are now properly impacting on the UK. And as we in turn come out of the major effects of the pandemic, then these are being seen very strongly. Now, this is combined with the fact that all the way through the pandemic, construction has continued, and it's been one of the stalwarts of the economy, which is really good. But of course, on top of that, we now see increased demand, and certainly in domestic refurbishment and maintenance, certainly in some parts of domestic operation, there is really significant increased demand. Some builders merchants, for instance, are reporting figures of up to 40% increase on pre-COVID levels. So this is really substantial demand that the UK industry is trying to cope with. Now, at the same time, people in the manufacturing sector have not been asleep at the wheel. We've been looking at additional product lines. We've been looking at ensuring that factories are working at optimum efficiency. But of course, factories have to have maintenance and repair at some point themselves. And also, the industry has not been immune to the effects of the pandemic. So shift patterns have had to be changed because people have to go into isolation. Obviously, lots of the workers have children who are affected in different ways. Maybe homeschooling came into it when that was in play. So we've had a lot of companies trying to dance around these particular issues to ensure that they continue with production. And in the main, that has worked, but it certainly has meant that the supply chains that normally run smoothly through the UK have been patchy. On top of all that lot, of course, we have seen some disruption at the borders, probably during the turn of the year, but that has apparently largely settled down now, except for rather small companies, SME level. Large players have been able to work their way through the new issues that have cropped up because of Brexit, except, of course, for Northern Ireland. Of course, that's in the news very much today with the G7. That continues to be a problem, and it continues to be something that needs to be resolved. But nonetheless, these issues are affecting the industry generally. We have also seen a shortage of drivers. So certainly the haulage industry is very challenged by the way things have changed in the last year. In particular, drivers are being attracted over to the supermarkets to provide the new huge support teams for home deliveries of groceries. That has taken drivers away from construction and is affecting how things can be distributed around the country. So we see there a wide range of factors. Now, this probably isn't of any consolation at all if you turn up at your local builder's merchant and you can't get some of your staple requirements, and that obviously is regrettable. And one of the reasons why we have continued with the CLC group is to continue the dialogue. That group is formed of a widespread across the whole industry. So we have representation from just about everybody across construction. And that's quite important because it keeps up the dialogue, it keeps up the conversation. So at least we can air the problems, we can identify where things possibly are getting quite serious, and we can ensure that we just explain to people that all of these things that I've been mentioning are in the works. And wherever possible, of course, people will try to provide solutions to get these things moving in a much better way. So lots of things going on that at the end of the day affect how we can get products and materials at the coalface. And I see some of these going on for quite some time yet, unfortunately. It would be great to turn up here and say, well, we know what's causing this and we've got some answers. Unfortunately, lots of things such as the timber shortages, such as the steel shortages, are a global issue. They're not something necessarily that in the UK we can do much about. But there are some things we can do, and we'll possibly come on to that in the later part of this morning's discussion. Now, before I close, I wanted to just also raise the issue of CA mark, because whilst we currently have a perfect storm of global and local and national issues to contend with, we also have the rollout of the CA mark transition, which is in progress and is meant to be complete by the end of this year. But what we have uncovered in looking at the detail is that there are a lot of products that run through the certification testing system that are caught by the fact that the UK does not have all of the testing and certification capability and capacity that it actually needs. This means that if we continue as a nation to stick to the deadline of the 1st of January next year, it will mean that there is no testing and certification capability for certain products. And we are compiling a list currently of the key examples. And what that effectively means is that unless we can figure out a way around this, or perhaps, as we're suggesting to government, produce a roadmap which smooths this transition, it will mean that significant delays and disruption to key products occur because they can't be placed on the market because they've not got a CA mark. Now, it also occurs that because we transition over to a CA mark only, it means that products from Europe that are currently CE marked will also not be allowed onto the market. And so an equal and opposite problem exists for European manufacturers. And again, I don't think I'm giving too much away to say that the European manufacturers have been a bit slow to rise to the challenge of that. But of course, everybody is now looking to the UK testing and certification industry to provide those certificates. And that is a challenge because we do not have the capacity, but also in some areas we just don't, it doesn't exist at all, never mind any capacity. So we need some time to work through this. What we are trying to do is to identify clear examples, both of disruption and of financial hardship, that we can supply to government. And certainly I know colleagues in BEIS and MHCLG are doing a lot of work on this right now. But I think it'd be helpful if anybody on this call, for instance, wants to give us further examples. I think that's all the better, because we do need to explain to government that we are facing some fairly catastrophic problems if we don't get some changes, some easement, or a modification as to how we're going to go forward. So I think that, you know, that's down the road. That's something we need to keep an eye on and keep the pressure on, but that's going to be happening at the turn of the year. Right now, we're faced with these issues that I was mentioning earlier, and I think we're now going to expand the conversation a bit and also then talk about some of the solutions. So for now, Chloe, I'll bring that to a close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That gave us a really comprehensive overview of the causes and the impact. I just wanted to really quickly pick up on the CA mark issue. Perhaps some of our audience aren't as aware of that as an issue because overall the material shortages problem is so huge that that's been preoccupying people, and this issue might have gone slightly under the radar, so people might not be quite as aware of it. But could you just give us some examples of the types of products that we're talking about? Well, what could actually be affected? Are we going to see a real shortage, if nothing is done? Obviously, I know you're saying government is looking at this now, but if nothing was done, what are we talking about here?
So Chloe, what we've been able to discover so far is, for instance, there is no capability in the UK to test radiators. So that would mean a full stop on radiators being available. We've got significant problems with regard to some types of ironmongery. So concealed hinges, it attacks very specific points. This goes back to some people might be aware of a system called AVCP3. It's the underlying testing regime that's backed up CE marking for some time. So it's the System 3 products that are really in trouble with regard to this. Sealants and adhesives are another one that's been highlighted to us as a real problem, and specialist glass as well. Any new glazing systems that need to be tested, there just aren't the facilities currently in the UK. And I'm afraid I hate to be the real doom monger here, but what I didn't also mention is we have a similar problem with a thing called REACH, which affects all chemicals. And so again, at the moment, we're facing a real problem because certain chemicals might not be available. And of course, there are very few products that don't contain some sort of chemical or other.
Right. Well, I think, that's a whole topic there, but I will reiterate to our listeners, if you have got examples for Peter, if you do think you will be affected, do let him know, do let us know. I think it's a topic that clearly we do have to keep an eye on, over and above the just general material shortages, which we will now move on to. So thank you, Peter. We're going to move on to Dean Avery's from Beard Construction, and he is going to share his screen because he has a presentation. Is that right, Dean?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
Lovely. So that just needs to go into full screen, and then Peter and I will turn off our webcams, and it's over to you, Dean.
Thank you. Good morning. So yeah, my name's Dean Avery. I'm director at Beard. We're a regional contractor, turnover in the order of £160 million, carrying out projects from very small value up to around 25 million. We work in most sectors, but specialise in education. I've been with Beard for 33 years. I've been through some boom times where demand has outstripped supply. I've been through some recessions where supply has outstripped demand. I don't recall ever being in this situation where supply and demand is so out of balance. And I'm going to use those words that Peter used as well, perfect storm. It really does feel to me that we've got some real supply issues we've never seen before, lead-ins, increased demand driving up prices on an extremely frequent basis. And so to put some flesh on the bones, I guess the ongoing supply chain disruption is built up from the issue to do with the out-of-kilter supply and demand. So from a supply perspective, again, repeating what Peter said, COVID has affected and continues to affect supply. We've had factory closures, some factories have been slow to reopen, especially on the continent, and there's also the reduced capacity complying with the social distancing rules as well. So that's created some issues with supply, and Brexit, again, repeating what Peter said, that I think it's fair to I don't believe we've seen the full effects of Brexit yet. It continues to affect the flow of materials into the country. From a demand perspective, there is high global demand, as well as in our country. I think pent-up demand following the recent year or so, dealing with the pandemic. Government spends, increased demand, mega projects such as HS2 have drawn significant volumes of certain materials, aggregates and concrete and so on. So the outcome is a real shortage of materials. Many materials are on allocation. We frequently hear stories of incomplete deliveries. So that's the problem. What are we doing differently about it? Specifically at Beard, some of the things that we're targeting here of changing our way. So in my experience, the cause of most problems in our industry is poor communication, but also the solution to most problems is better communication. So the first thing we're doing is we really are stepping up our communication. We've increased the frequency for our senior management team meetings from monthly to weekly. We've increased our supply chain meetings from monthly to weekly. Our supply chain really is our best asset, and we need to understand in real time the challenges that they're facing. Procurement's the first item on the agenda for our commercial team meetings. And moving on to procurement, so we are a main contractor. We typically employ 30 to 40 subcontractors on every project. And oversimplifying the type of work we do, we work on refurbishment schemes. Because of the very nature of those schemes, we need to front end load the procurement, so we need all trades pretty much from day one. We do design and build, where the timing of our procurement needs are based on not just the build program, but also the need for design development. And then traditional projects, where the procurement is based on the build program. We've identified the top 10 riskiest packages for every project, and we've diverted significant QS resource to look at procurement in a more strategic way. And for us, the key tool is the procurement schedule to manage this rapidly evolving situation. In the medium term, we're pushing two-stage procurement. It obviously allows the overlap between design development and the costing exercises and so on. But also, earlier supply chain engagement is absolutely critical to engage with our supply chain earlier than we currently are. And then the final item here is product substitution. So we're necessary, following the better communication, the better awareness and the earlier procurement, where we've got real issues with specific components. We've got the time to go through various design iterations to review substituting particular products. So what can the industry do differently? So for me, this is a perfect example, raising the awareness to make sure that all of the relevant parties in our industry are aware of the real challenges that we're all facing. But specifically, better planning, more appropriate lead-ins to be able to start projects on time and maintain progress. And more appropriate procurement routes, picking up the theme again of the advantages of two-stage procurement. It allows earlier contractor involvement, earlier supply chain engagement, but really importantly, more collaboration. So this is going to be a bumpy year. There's no two ways about it. In the real short term, I actually think it could be a quite challenging summer, especially for those that work in sectors with high seasonal demands. At Beard, we work quite predominantly in the education sector, and it's certainly at the smaller end of the schemes that we carry out. Projects need to start when students finish, and they need to be finished for when students return. So I think the flow of the reactive nature of some of that work, it could be really challenging. But as well as material shortages, we've got people issues. A number of our foreign labour friends have been prevented from travelling to see their families for obvious reasons last year, and they've given us advance notice that they have a long overdue holiday. They want to go back and see their families, and if the government restrictions are relaxed to allow them to do it, there could be some real shortages during this summer specifically. I think a word of caution regarding inflation and price rises and so on. I think it's impossible to predict inflation and price rises. So for any project that's on site for over a year, I guess just that word of caution that we need to be really careful as an industry and maybe need to consider sharing the risk with our customers. I'm just going to share a few examples of some of the challenges that we're facing on some of our projects now. So the second column is the what we're sort of typical lead-in sort of last year, and the delays that we're currently facing on specific elements now. I won't read through the examples, but you can see the significant difference. And there's some more examples. Again, it is really proving quite challenging. So drawing my presentation to close, that concludes me speaking. The final word from me is caution. Just please be careful over this next period. It is going to be a bumpy year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dean. I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said there. It's really, really interesting to see your sort of first-hand experience of how things are going. And I know you spoke to my colleagues last month, and at that point you were saying, April had been worse than March, and March had been worse than February. Did May pan out to be worse than April, and are you seeing it sort of progressively get worse? Is that what you're talking about when you say watch out for a bumpy summer?
Yeah, absolutely. We had an example. It's more to do with cost rises, but we typically have a period to bid for new work of around 4, 5, 6 weeks. And the first time in my career, we had an example where we had a quotation from one subcontractor a couple of weeks ago, and they revised their price, but just before we were supposed to submit our bid with an increased price increase because of the cost increase. So I've never seen that before. So that's an example of the fluid situation that we are facing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we will come back round to that, and I do encourage our listeners to post their questions to Dean and the other panelists, and we will come to that at the end. But definitely, cost increases and how contractors can make a profit at this time is a key challenge. So we now have Rachel from Orms Architects, and I will hand over to her for her presentation, and Dean and I are going to turn off our webcams and mics. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chloe. I am hopefully sharing my screen so everybody can see that. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel today. So we're Orms Architects. We're an employee ownership trust of approximately 70 people. We're a London-based practice, primarily working in the commercial sector, although we also have a number of projects in the hospitality and education sectors. And over the past 35 years, we have become specialists at unlocking the potential of existing buildings. This is one of our recently completed projects and a personal favourite of mine, the Standard Hotel in King's Cross. This is the original structural facade that was cleaned. We put in some new windows and a new rooftop extension was added. And in doing so, it's gone from one of the least loved to one of the best loved buildings in the area. Our founder, Oliver, likes to say that we fell into reusing existing buildings by accident, but now it's most definitely by choice. Of course, not every building can be reused, and that's an important point to make, but it should definitely be considered at the outset. For the past year, we've become a little bit obsessed with the data behind this, and this graph is showing the relative carbon impact of a number of our in progress or recently completed projects. And what you're seeing is the deep retrofits and the refurbishments have much lower carbon impact than the new builds. So what does all of this have to do with material shortages? Well, is material reuse a solution for material shortages? The simple answer is no, but we think that it can really help with the current problems because we already know that we need to be reusing materials that we already have in existence. We have got to stop pulling virgin materials from the earth, and material reuse is going to be something that we need to look as an industry much more closely at. We're fortunate to work with a number of fantastic clients who see the value of good design in delivering their sustainability objectives, but are also looking to push their sustainability ambitions with active research projects. So a recent example of this type of work is the Material Reuse Innovation Project that we collaborated with the Grosvenor Estate on. And the outcome of this work was a piece about material passports, which I'm going to take you through now. So we believe that in order to address the current climate emergency, we need to move towards a circular economy. It's a necessity, no longer a choice. And this document sets out our manifesto for something called a material passport. And our ambition was to increase material reuse of existing buildings. So we know that current construction and demolition practices are not circular, and they produce a huge amount of waste, which in 2016 was approximately 62% of the UK's total. And we were aiming to reduce the amount of waste produced by the construction industry by encouraging deconstruction and material reuse. And this all starts with a concept called material banks. So viewing a building as a material bank. What do I mean by that? So it's seeing an existing building as a repository or a stockpile of valuable, high quality materials that can easily be taken apart and recovered. So in simple terms, if you look at the diagram on the left, we have an existing building full of existing materials. If we can deconstruct and catalogue all of those materials, then when we're going out to procure and source additional materials, we need to procure less. And then the completed building is a mixture of the reused materials and some additional materials. Now, these additional materials may be new, but equally they could be reused materials from other buildings. Of course, there are some barriers to this and why these materials aren't currently being reused. The first is cost. So typically it is cheaper to demolish and buy new rather than deconstruct and refurbish a product and put it back into the existing building. Also, the way that we've been designing, contemporary construction favours chemical fixing over mechanical, and then this can make it very time consuming to remove materials and often damages them in the process, so they're not suitable for reuse. And lastly, and the biggest barrier, is risk. So we often have a lack of knowledge about an existing material, and this leads to a lack of confidence in it. So how can we trust that the material will perform as we need it to? So a material passport. Waste is a material without an identity. I think this is a really important quote by someone who's done a lot of research into this area, Thomas Rao. And the concept of a material passport is in the same way that it gives, my passport gives an identity to me and tells you key information about myself and where I've been. Same thing goes for material passport. So it may include information regarding the physical or the chemical components of the product, but also the condition and the original specifications of it. And this knowledge about a material can give us confidence in it and enable successful reuse. So very simplistically, this would be an example of a material passport for a concrete block. So you can see that it has some key dimensions. We've looked at the method of fixing, we know the date of manufacture, where it was manufactured, and we're also looking at how we grade it from both a performance and also an aesthetic perspective. In action, I think it's important to make the point that we have developed an approach to delivering material passports on existing projects, and our approach is very much a design tool. So I'm an architect, that's my role, and I was looking at how I can be reusing materials in an existing project on the redeveloped project. So we have been looking at putting together a database of the cataloguing and putting together a database of the materials that already exist in the building, and then I'm trying to reuse that as I design the project. And looking ahead in use, we could potentially start to attach tags to the physical built element. So a QR code is a really simple way of doing it, or an RFID tag is also another way. And when scanned, this can bring up this pertinent information. So this means that all the time and effort that the team have put in at the start, that information isn't going to be lost. And hopefully, as the building is maintained on an ongoing basis, that information will grow. So you know that the product was maintained and therefore is suitable for reuse. So I suppose an open invitation if anyone is interested in applying this research. We're always keen to speak and collaborate with others. If you scan the QR code that's visible on screen now, you'll see an example of a material passport. This is the unfiltered one, so this is showing the entire database behind it, and of course you would want to start to filter that down. For those of you who have an iPhone, you can do this with just your camera, and there's on Android you need to download an app, so it might take a little bit longer, but you can come back to this slide. And also, we are UK GBC Circular Economy partners for 2021-2022, and we're very pleased to be collaborating with them on their research work. We believe that they've done great work into how we could look at reusing existing products. This how-to guide is a great first start for anyone who doesn't know much but would like to learn more. We truly believe in a circular economy, and this is why we have become partners, and we look forward to hopefully continuing the conversation with others. So on that note, I'm going to end and say thank you, and I think we're probably going to move to discussion.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. That's really interesting presentation, really interesting to sort of look at materials from another perspective, and I would encourage all of our listeners who are keen to collaborate. I've just done the QR code, which is very exciting as you were talking. But if you missed that slide, this is all available on demand, so you can get that QR code and look in more detail at what Rachel was talking about. Just briefly, Rachel, you're at a fairly early stage with this, or how much work have you put into it so far?
This is very early stage, so we were at a very early stage with a project, and this came up in discussion. You know, how do we do better as a design team, as a client? I think it's important to mention that, you know, the great estates, we work with a number of the great estates, so Grosvenor, Crown Estate, Portland, and I think that they are in a great position because they're custodians of these buildings. So they have a very long-term view. They're able to invest in this sort of thinking, and they want to be handing over their estates in better condition than they received them. So to answer your question, yes, it's at the very early stages. We haven't seen it through a project yet. We're going to be doing that this year, and you know, it's not perfect. That is an extract from a much larger brochure that sort of talks you through all of the background research that went into it. So if anyone is interested, I encourage you to have a read through. There are lots of challenges with it in terms of how we design our design softwares, and of course how we procure. But just because it's difficult, we don't believe we shouldn't try. And if everyone is trying and trying together, so speaking at events like this, sharing this information, this thinking, and encouraging other people to participate in the conversation, hopefully we can move forward and together come up with a solution.
Well, lovely. I'm just noticing questions are piling in, and a lot of requests just to see that QR code quickly one more time. Are you able to?
Yes. Let me flick back. Can you see that?
People who missed it, yes. So that's on.
There we go.
Yeah. So anyone who really wants to quickly grab that QR code. In the meantime, we'll just leave that on the screen for a minute or so for people, and then if I could invite Peter and Dean back, and we will sort of do some Q&A stuff. But altogether, I thought that was a really fascinating overview of, you know, we basically had sort of the causes and the impact of material shortages, and then some really practical ideas around how to help. I suppose it's where to start, really. I mean, I guess one question in terms of like theming some of this, that's probably fine, isn't it? Yes, people have said thank you for the QR code, brilliant. And just a reminder again to listeners, you will get that again if you come back to the on-demand session. But yeah, I think a lot of questions that are coming through are around, well, how is this? We know about the shortages. What is coming up in terms of price increases? And I don't know, I know CPA does quite a bit of work in terms of forecasting. Have you got kind of worst case scenario forecasts for the year, or how do you do it, Peter?
Well, Chloe, that's a very good question, because I've got to say that that's the province of my my economics team, and they'll kill me if I get this wrong. But yeah, this is a very challenging time, as everybody said. We're looking at certainly more than 10% overall price increases, which is ridiculous in terms of what we've seen in past history. But you know, the forecast is showing us that these price increases are not going to go away for the short term. But certainly, hopefully, things are going to get better, as we've said, as things sort of regularize a bit better. But as Dean said, you know, we're in for a choppy time, both in terms of pricing and in terms of availability. And again, I probably can't remember a time when things were so difficult. But we've been through an unprecedented event, haven't we? So it's probably to be expected.
And there was a specific question about steel. Do you see steel as a particular problem?
We do, because again, this comes back to the principle that whilst China produces more steel than anybody, it's also currently importing more steel than anybody. And again, I'd emphasize a point I made earlier, that we talk about steel as one thing. Of course, there are many grades of steel, and in construction we've got specific needs for rebar, for structural steel, for brackets, and all of those are different types of steel produced in different plants. So we've got a curious position that even though the UK does produce a lot of steel, some of the steel that construction needs is imported, and therefore subject to those wider global pressures, I'm afraid.
Right, okay. Well, we've got another question here, which has been directed to Dean, and he says the person here saying saw that cement was listed on, I think one of your presentation slides had a table, and he's just saying, so he thought that UK was fairly self-sufficient in cement, and you know, how can stakeholders work together really to help with that? Dean, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, the issue we've found, so generally cement is not too bad. It just means that sort of price. I think you used to be able to collect cement in reasonable quantities, sort of ex stock. We're finding that it's sort of in the order of a couple of weeks. But one of the stories I've been told by one of the merchants we use typically is the issue isn't the supply of cement, it's actually the issue of the plastic bags. That one of the challenges they've had, my understanding is a significant fire in China that had some real impact on the supply of plastic. Whether that is the specific cause, but yeah, the cement itself is actually okay. It's the packaging that our merchant's been telling us. Peter, if you've got any more to add on that.
Yeah, if I can just add, and apologies, because one of the things I forgot to mention in my tale of woe at the beginning was, of course, we all clocked the problems in Texas at the turn of the year, and apparently a large percentage of the ingredients that go into plastic at a very base level are made in those factories in Texas that were affected. So that then put a ripple around the world in terms of production of PVC. You're right, Dean, that there was also a contributory fire in China as well. So that, again, you know, when things start to get critical or supply lines are interrupted, all of these things have an effect. And that's what we're seeing. And I think also, just to add to the cement issue, yes, we are self-sufficient, but also the cement industry has had the same effects of staffing, of shift patterns. They've also had to go through a degree of obviously maintenance on the plant. And again, when everything is running at such a high level, all of these things have an impact.
Yes, no, I think that does give a wider overview as to why we're having these problems. It may seem bizarre that one thing is particularly affected, and we may think that UK is self-sufficient, but actually we maybe underestimate how much disruption there's been.
Yeah, absolutely, Chloe. You know, we produce 76% of the products for the construction industry in the UK, but significantly, a lot of the components that go into those products actually are on fairly long supply chains these days. So it's amazing how one knock-on effect can really have a significant impact, you know, right across the world.
Yeah, and just to come back to some of Rachel's points about, you know, obviously reusing and reclaiming materials. We've got one question here which is around surely taking that approach, it's not the current approach, it's not mainstream, but so how big a shift is it going to be, and is that going to affect sort of, if we were really to embrace that sort of procurement models, and how would contractors and the whole supply chain respond to that? I suppose it's a big question. But...
Yeah, well, if I may, we haven't been asleep on that one. In fact, this month we've launched a thing with British Standards called British Standards Identify. That will mean that for all new products, exactly as Rachel was talking about, we have an RDF code or a QR code on the product, and then an independent cloud-based source for the manufacturer's information. So from that point on, we will have one version of the truth in terms of what is the product that you've got in front of you. And again, that has an impact on specifying, procurement, installation and maintenance. So we feel that's quite a significant step forward. Teaming that up with, obviously, how you analyze existing buildings with existing products is terrific to see the work that Rachel's been doing. And a lot of work is also going on in terms of how you can deconstruct products, because, you know, as Rachel mentioned, current thinking is that you want to fix things together, and we're after durability, and of course in a post-Grenfell arena we want buildings that are safe, so performance of materials is crucial. So getting that balance between ensuring durability and performance and safety, while at the same time ensuring that at some time down the future path we can actually take it apart efficiently and maintain the individual performance of components, is quite a tricky question, and it's one that's going to take a lot of work actually to move it forward. But you've got to start somewhere. That's the crucial thing.
Exactly, Rachel. That's where ORMS has come in, and doing, I guess just as a business perspective, just thinking, well, we're going to forge ahead and do something ourselves.
Yeah, let's just try. And, we've already tried on another project. We said, right, let's look and see if we can put in reused sinks. And we got as far as we could. We hit some stumbling blocks. They're not going on this project, but we've learned a lot from it. And on the next one, we're going to try and have the right conversations with different people at the right time. I think it's important to say that, yes, this is absolutely idealistic. It is a perfect world. In this perfect storm, it can seem really, really challenging to get there. But I have to say, people that we've spoken to about this, I'm part of a UK GBC working group for the Circular Economy Forum. And one of the first things that we looked at was design for disassembly. So as a design team, we have got to be helping our contractors in coming at it with the right approach from the get-go. We can't be giving them a building that basically needs to be glued together and then expecting that materials can be reused at the end. So we need to shift our thinking. And as part of that work, we spoke to a number of demolition contractors in and around London. And a lot of the conversations that we've been having with them, a lot of the conversations we've been having with our own supply chain is, well, nobody's ever asked us to do this. So, I went to our lighting manufacturers that we would normally specify and said, any chance we could specify a reclaimed and refurbished product? And they all sort of looked at me and said, are you sure about that? What do you mean by that? So I think it's important to have these conversations. It's important, as Dean was saying, to have these conversations with the contractors very early on, coming to the table with, we have this idea, we have these ambitions, what opportunities do you see, and what challenges are you going to face? How can we work through these together? And in the early enabler projects, we may need clients to do very early procurement of reused products, because we'll have had to design, if you think the steel structure, we want to specify reused steel. We're going to have to design with great flexibility so that when the time comes for the actual procurement of the steel, those stock sizes and grades are available, or we have this built-in tolerance that there's an allowance to be made to enable different options, whatever the current availability is, enable those different options to be used. It's going to take a lot of work, but we think it is feasible. We know that there are some things that are going to be easier to reuse than others. steel being one. Beams can be retested. We have got to consider the safety aspect of it. We've also had a lot of debates, and Grosvenor have a material reuse network, so if you want to just Google that, you'll find a link to it, where they're trying to kickstart the second-hand marketplace, because there isn't a market for this. At the moment, you have to go to each manufacturer and say, I'm looking for this specific thing, and see if they can help you. But imagine a world where, you know, a building is coming down, we're releasing a lot of material, it goes somewhere, and then it's somehow available for us to procure back. Well, where does it go? Is it client to client? So it's, you know, direct procurement. That's not going to be sustainable in the long term. Is it going to go into a centralized marketplace? Well, how do we handle testing and re-warranties and refurbishing? It seems like the best way to do it is that there's manufacturer take-back schemes. At the moment, manufacturer take-back schemes, typically they take them back, they will recycle the product in some way. And unfortunately, recycling tends to mean that you're downcycling. So taking it back and shredding it and making 20% of it goes into your new product isn't quite the same as taking it back, cleaning it, repairing it, and then selling it as refurbished. So we need to have that conversation about what we mean when we say reuse. We mean keeping something in a high value state and reusing it in that high value state. There is an example out there, manufacturers for raised access floors. You can purchase refurbished raised access floors, and they take them back, they clean them down, they test them, and then they sell them typically a little bit less than a brand new floor. So that's one option that is quite well known in the industry now, and a lot of people are looking at. But I think it's a good model for how manufacturers could begin to think about this. But yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, yeah, a whole other area. I'm just going to be back because we've got lots of questions coming in. One for Dean, which is around concerns around skilled labour and how that's feeding into the material shortages. It feels like you can't completely separate them, and that they are kind of feeding in and happening at the same time for similar reasons, possibly. How are you finding that, Dean?
There are undoubtedly shortages. I think what it forces us all to do is do the right thing and treat our supply chain as friends rather than at arm's length. I think one of the critical things is the payment. I think prompt payment of our supply chain to allow that cash flow to cascade through the industry is absolutely critically important. And I do believe it could be a real differentiator between the best payers in our industry and those that try and hold on to their cash. But yeah, there are shortages, and it is particularly challenging. I said earlier, I think this summer in particular could be a real short-term challenging time. Yeah, in the medium term, we need to train more people in our industry. We need to make the industry more appealing to younger people to come into the industry, and I think there's a whole piece of work that's going to take a generation to make our industry more appealing. I think we've lost our way.
Yeah. And then in terms of there's another question for you, Dean, around how do contractors react with tender prices? So we've heard from Peter, cost inflation looking around sort of 10%. Are you predicting that tender prices are going to go up?
Absolutely, without a doubt, tender prices are going up without question. To me, the really important topic is the concept of risk. This isn't future price increases for a project that is on the site typically for a couple of years. It is very, very difficult to predict for the latter trades what that cost is going to be, and I do believe that we are going to have more grown-up conversations with our customers regarding sharing risk. It is a real challenge. For us, the majority, I've been having some quite high-level conversations. We specialise in education. We specialise in Oxford and in the education sector around the University of Oxford and the colleges and so on. and having conversations regarding the concept of sharing risk going forward. It's been relatively manageable for a long time to be able to predict inflation level and going on fixed prices, but I think that is becoming incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for long-term projects.
Yeah. And then just this is sort of wider to everyone, but I suppose there's also been a theme around SMEs being hit hardest by this, and maybe the bigger projects, the projects like HS2, Hinkley Point C, sucking in the materials and the products and leaving the rest to scrabble for what's left. And I know the CLC put out a note last month sort of calling for collaboration, communication, understanding. I guess this is to you, Peter, but how much is that happening? I know you talk about this group meeting regularly. How regularly do you meet? How many people come to those meetings? Are those quite fractious meetings, or are people fairly understanding?
So we meet currently every month, Chloe. I co-chair it with John Newcomb from the Builders Merchants Federation, so we get a good spread, if you like, of his members and my members. We also bring in representatives from BEIS, so we've got government in the room, and we absolutely try and make sure that we have got representation from tier 1 contractors right the way through to the smallest SMEs, and representation across the whole material spectrum. Now, I think everybody is slightly tense, but we do have a professional conversation about what's going on, and that's really important going forward. The message that the CLC is trying to ensure is these are difficult times, these are stressful times. If everybody understands the issues, then that's good, and try not to focus on the anecdotal stuff, which actually a lot of the time isn't true. I mean, we've referenced HS2 a couple of times, but HS2 is not geared up yet. So the amount of materials and commodities that HS2 will absorb is at a very small level relatively at the moment. So some of the rumours, as far as we can tell, that we've seen in social media are simply not true. So the issue for us is to make sure that we do have the people around the table who factually understand what's going on. As I said in my section, it is no consolation to people who turn up and they can't get the materials that they need. But what they can be assured of is that the wider industry is doing everything it possibly can. So that's about making sure that people understand where the hardship is. Many of the points that Dean mentioned, which is really good advice, I'd say, have been repeated in those forums continuously, and we will just try and work together. But a lot of this, as I started in saying, is not under the control of the UK at all. So that's where we're at, and if we can come up with better communication, better innovation to weather the storm, so much the better. But it isn't about people pointing fingers or listening to, shall we say, rather hysterical comments on social media. That's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. And just one final question for you, Peter. I think there are a couple of questions around the CA mark and people wanting to find out a little bit more around the products that might be affected. Is there a sort of source of information where people can go to read more about it and understand if they're going to be affected?
Sorry, Chloe. Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, there's an emerging topic. Increasingly, there will be more information on the CLC website. We also feature quite a bit on the CPA website as well. And what that hopefully will tell people is the background to the problem and the current situation. It's a rapidly changing situation, and we would ask people just keep alive to it, particularly if you feel it's going to affect your part of the industry. And again, we're doing everything we can to avoid it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up there, but just a reminder to listeners, if you have missed any bits of this, you can see it all again, and for that special QR code, but also I know people were very interested in Dean's tables and looking at lead times and all of those issues. So there were great presentations, really fantastic background. So for people who do want an overview of what's happening and want to share this with colleagues, do come back to the link. The on-demand version will be available very soon. Thank you for all of your questions. My thanks to Rachel, Dean and Peter for giving such great presentations. We're going to wrap it up here, but I do want to remind people we have another webinar at 2 p.m. looking at innovation in materials. And on our websites, we have a lot of information today up on our home pages around materials. So a lot of these issues that we're talking about, we have written about in the past. So do go back for more reference there. But for now, thank you very much to my speakers, and I hope to invite you all again very soon. Goodbye.